How's it going, fam? Welcome back to Erica's EDC, and today we are doing the full review of the Slater by Dusty at Duckhead Forge. This is in S60V blade steel. I have a ton to share with you guys about this, seeing that we've run it for a month and we've done a whole bunch of sharpening on it, a ton of research. It is a beautiful day here in New Hampshire. We're in the garage, the kids are outside playing, I've got the dogs out, so you're probably gonna hear some typical background noise, but guys, this was one of the most intriguing steels I've ever tested, and my hypothesis about it initially was actually correct, I found out. So let's get into it. First, we're gonna start off with some information about S60V because it's kind of like the forgotten super steel of the knife world, as Larrin would call it. I do have my notebook here, and I'm gonna just, talk at you guys a little bit about the history of S60V per Larrin's research and data, because I think it will really flow into my experience. Disclaimer, I did not know any of this stuff before I started the testing. The only thing I knew was the basics about S60V. I knew that it was supposed to be kind of a stainless iteration of 10V, obviously not as good in terms of edge retention and stuff, but CPM was basically aiming for a stainless 10V type knife or type steel. And I did not really look any further than that in terms of data because I wanted to, at the end of the month, see if my experiences matched up with the research and the testing that Larrin did on the steel. I think it's kind of cool to see, what I think of everything during my testing and how realistic it is to the findings scientifically. So, we're just going to look at these notes here, and we're going to kind of summarize S60V as a blade steel per Larrin's website, the Knife Steel Nerds, data, charts, all that stuff. So in 1970, that's when Crucible really started amping up the industrial production of the powder metallurgy tool steels. And the high vanadium tool steels have much greater toughness when produced with powder metallurgy. Basically, what you are getting is finer grain structure, finer vanadium carbides, which are even smaller in the commercial world than the chromium carbides, which can lead to, that fine grain structure can really provide really good toughness and kind of an overall better user experience. So 1970 is when we really start to see, like I said, the production of these steels really, catching up here. So vanadium carbides, as I've talked about before on the channel, vanadium carbides are harder than chromium carbides. I like vanadium carbides a lot because the chromium ones, everything is kind of a give and take in the knife world, composition wise, but I really like steels with high vanadium carbide content because they perform the best for me. And that's exactly what S60V is. It has a really high carbide volume, and those carbides are vanadium carbides. So looking at the data of this steel, I was actually really stoked about it because it's right up my alley. But, we have reduced carbide size, like I said, which can benefit the use. S60V was originally called 440V, which we've talked about on the channel as well. A 10V alternative, it was essentially 440C with added vanadium and carbon to compensate for that, right? It's supposed to have a good combo of wear resistance and corrosion resistance, surprisingly fine carbide structure, and like I said, I'm kind of just summarizing off of Larrin's website here to give you guys a background of what he had found. Finer than M390 LMAX, CPM 154, better edge retention than S30V, LMAX, M390, but lower than S90V and 10V, as tough as 154 cm, VG10 and LMAX, and easy to sharpen. That's kind of the summary based off of Larrin's findings from his website. Larrin, thank you again for everything you do for the community. Let's get into what I found, because I've been testing this for a month straight. This has been a really fun steel to use, and everything from that website was true from my experience, but the reasoning behind it was what really intrigued me. I did a lot of sharpening with this, a lot of toying around with diamond abrasives, ceramic abrasives, aluminum oxide versus CBN diamond emulsion, and what I found was really interesting. So let's start off with what came to me from Dusty. So Dusty made this in his little shop down in Georgia. He works at Pop's Knife Supply. Dusty's a really good guy. Duckhead Forge is his knife making little business there, and he makes gorgeous knives. I would say aesthetically really pleasing, and that's one of the main points of his work. They're just absolutely gorgeous. He does this forge finish. They're not forged, but he does a beautiful forge finish. Just incredible ergonomics, fit and finish. Everything is so cool about these. This is a design that I worked on with him. That's why it's called the Slater, which he surprised me with that name. That's my last name. I didn't ask him to name it that. He just, as we did the reveal, that's what he said the name was, which was really an honor because his work is incredible. He has worked kind of alongside with Steve Kalari, Super Steel Steve from Kalari Custom Knives, to work on his edges. Just a very honorable, reputable, amazing maker in the community. So he made this out of S60V because we were talking about a couple of options, and until the K390 came in for our big batch of this, S60V was one of the options that I could use. And because I had never used it and quite frankly never really heard of it, I was like, definitely make it in S60V. It's kind of a rarity. I don't know anything about it. I'd love to test it. So this is S60V, all done by him in his shop. It's at 62 HRC. It came with about 20 degrees per side, a convex edge. I laid it back to 18 degrees per side, and it is a flat grind, but kind of a hybrid, like a convex flat grind. So geared toward EDC and some light outdoor use, which I've also shown in some videos. Tapered tang, very lightweight. This one is in Sure Grip scales. So that's G10 infused with rubber. And we've got micarta liners. It's a forge finish, so although it looks like there's some gapping, that's just the forge finish going all the way through. And the little divots from that forge finish are filled with epoxy. So this is all flush, all flat, all even. It just looks like there are holes in it because that's where the epoxy is filled in on that forge finish. So, comes with a handmade USA leather sheath that he just got from Pops. But this arrived, great edge. Like I said, it was a convex edge, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but I ran it for like almost the whole month. And the last week of testing is when I really just obsessed over trying different edges and different abrasives and sharpening. So the convex edge that it came with was an all-around awesome edge. It was sharp, it was very stable. We did some woodwork outside, which I filmed. We've done cardboard cutting, it did awesome, and it really provided a lot of stability to that edge, even with some pretty abrasive and impactful testing tasks. So we didn't have any rolling, any chipping, nothing with that edge. Really, really nice. I wanted to try a higher polished edge, and then I also wanted to try a really rough, like 325 toothy edge on it to see what worked best. Because when I sharpened it for the first time, I worked through a whole progression, which I talked about. It was basically like a 220 DMT all the way up to a 2000 Sharpening glass, which is a ceramic stone. And the edge that it left it with was not really that toothy. It was pretty refined, definitely semi-polished. And I had a hypothesis that it was going to be kind of like a glassy edge that I wouldn't prefer myself. And I said it felt like the grain structure of this steel and the way it kind of all comes together, it felt very fine. I didn't know that scientifically. That's just what I thought before I did the research, like I said, because I wanted to figure out firsthand what this was doing before I knew the science behind it. So we ran the 2000 Sharpening glass edge, and it did very well. I sat out in the driveway last night. We did a whole bunch of like feather sticking and playing around with pieces of wood, doing feather sticks on some limbs like this, just playing around with it. It did amazingly well with that polished edge. And I did something to test the edge stability and toughness, which was pretty brutal, but I purposely took the knife as I was whittling, and I was sitting in the driveway, and I took it and I went through the wood and then full force pushed it into the asphalt, which seems kind of stupid, but it's something that could happen. Like, I'm trying to replicate what would happen if you hit a rock when you're out camping, if you dropped it on concrete. So I was trying to figure out how tough this was, because I've heard from people that S60V does not really have great impact toughness. When I saw Larrin's data and the charts and stuff, it actually doesn't look too bad in my opinion for the makeup, but I went full force into the driveway, stabbed it, took a picture, nearly zero damage. Now, for reference, when we did the same thing with an SE Azula in 1095, it was a failure, I would say. Literal chunks missing out of the edge. That's a whole other story. Could have been a burnt edge. We don't know, but I've had 20 CV fail that test on camera, and I have had 1095 fail that test on camera as well. This had 4 tiny, not even, like, you can almost not see them. They look like tiny little dots, like 4 little tiny microchips from going full force into the driveway. Basically nothing. I was absolutely shocked. So that's really cool, because the toughness is actually decent in this steel for what it is. So ran that edge. It did very well, but not what I would personally like want, I guess. And that's when I brought it upstairs after, and I completely reversed that entire polish, did a 220 DMT and a 325 DMT, and that's it. And that's where we saw just the incredible characteristics of this steel really shine. So when I did the 220 and the 325, it feels like a completely different knife. Extremely toothy, crazy easy to sharpen. I love how it came up. It's got a lot of bite, and it does not feel glassy like it did with that 2000. Now, this really intrigued me, because 325 is pretty gritty. That's a pretty low grit. Not all steels would do well with such a rough finish edge, I guess. It can be kind of jagged. Some really like to be brought up to 600 grit, and then they're better. But 325 is not for every steel. It absolutely excels with this, and I think it's because of that high carbide volume, and they happen to be vanadium carbides, which are very hard, but because this is a crucible steel and the way that the powder metallurgy works, like I said at the beginning of the video, those vanadium carbides are much smaller. They're very refined. That's where that glassing out came from. So because the carbides are so small, I think bringing it up to that 2000 grit hindered the carbide shining through and giving us that tooth and that bite, because it's already a very refined grain structure steel. So if you start to polish it up, you're not allowing those carbides to grab and do the work for you. And it's so funny, because I could feel that during the sharpening. So when I brought it all the way down to 325, it's a really stable edge, and it's actually not as jagged as if you left other steels at 325, because the grain structure is so fine. Those vanadium carbides are so much smaller. Very cool. Really, really cool to see firsthand. So now even though this is a 325 finish on this edge, not stropped, nothing. It's actually a very fine edge, which would not work for every steel. So we've got a really beautiful kind of shine there for a 325 stone. And it's really toothy, but it's not jagged. I have a couple of materials here that I'm just gonna show you how this moves through those materials with a 325 grit edge. We've got some cardboard here because that's something a lot of people cut. I'm just gonna stand up so I don't have to hold it above my head. But this is a 325 grit edge on cardboard. Just shreds it, like really, really impressive. I think this is really nice. So that's awesome. And then if we take some wood here, you can get really fine curls with that 325 as well. That's the one that we just created. Those are from earlier. But you can really do some work with this 325 and it just bites, but it's not jagged because of the composition. So that is awesome. It's really cool when I kind of assume or hypothesize how a steel is going to perform and then it actually does without knowing the data behind it. I think that's so cool. So this is definitely a steel from my testing that I would say you bring to a 325 DMT finish and leave it at that. Don't even bother stropping. Don't do anything to it because you don't want to lose that bite. I did a whole bunch of different sharpening with this. We brought it up to 2,000. I did do 600. I did the 325, and out of all of them, 325 DMT is the sweet spot for S60V if you want the best performance. So let's see. Yeah, we did the high polish, didn't work as well. Great edge stability. Let's see. I want to talk about stropping real quick because that was another aspect that I was really surprised about. So I did try stropping this with diamond emulsion spray, and it worked really well. I also tried with your typical aluminum or chromium oxide, whatever it is, aluminum oxide rub-on compound, the brick stuff that's like garbage. That actually completely like ruined the edge. I used a strop with the green compound on it, and it literally like trashed the edge that I had just created. The reason why I think that happened is because this is so loaded with vanadium carbides, which are obviously harder than chromium carbides. That also means that the vanadium carbides are harder than a lot of your abrasives that you're going to use. So the vanadium carbides in the steel were harder than the aluminum oxide products that I was using. And I think because of that, number one, it didn't do anything to benefit the edge because the products I was using, they were not like hard enough to actually impact this edge positively. But I almost wonder if because they were softer, they made the apex and the edge malfunction. I think they actually hindered it and in a microscopic manner almost damaged my work. Because like I said, I tried, sharpening with the ceramic and it kind of didn't really do that well. I also tried sharpening with your classic products and it didn't do anything to help at all. I think you really do have to use all around diamond emulsion spray, CBN, and diamond stones for this steel, and nothing else is really going to work. Things that you used for 1095 and A2 and 01, they're not going to even touch S60V because it's so loaded with high carbide content, high carbide volume. So something to just think about if you are going to use S60V, because you cannot use your typical simple kind of old school tactics to maintain this. It's not going to work for you. Let's see. I guess we're at the conclusion here because we're at 20 minutes and I'm at the end of my notes. The conclusion is this is a very underrated steel in my opinion. It's really good. It's surprisingly good, and I'm not entirely sure why people don't really use it. It's as easy to sharpen as VG10, 154 cm in Magna Cut. It's extremely tough for what it is. It does need diamond abrasives to actually do anything, but all around, I would love to see more S60V being used. This is just a really, really cool steel. And I think it maybe fell by the wayside because production-wise, I don't think a lot of people had the means to process it and heat treat it properly. From my research, it looks like a lot of the protocols that people used while they were using S60V only brought it to like 56 to 58 HRC, and that literally is not doing anything. Like, that's basically a butter knife that you have at that point. This has to be above 60 HRC to actually work, and you don't have a lot of wiggle room with this. This is not like a typical steel where you can run a range of like 60 to 63 for a hardness. This has to be kind of like at 62. You can't go higher, and you don't necessarily want to go lower. I think because it's so finicky, not a lot of people want to use it. It also seems like you have to cryo treat it. This isn't like a quenching steel that you can just dip in some canola oil in your garage and run it. This is not for the faint of heart. This is something that an experienced maker would have to use, and I think that's why we don't really see it. Let's go over real quick kind of how the design did in the testing. Now that we've talked about the steel specifically, we'll talk about the design because I had a hand in it. We'll talk about this sure grip handle, and then we'll close this down. The knife is one of the most comfortable knives that I've ever used in my entire life. I think Dusty nailed the ergonomics of this. So we have a really minimalistic handle, and in the middle we do have a slight palm swell on this side, but it does also show in there we go, in that direction. So it swells out on the side and in between your fingers. So you kind of go like this, and that's where that little hump sits. It's really, really comfortable. I used this for basically an hour straight last night, whittling and feather sticking and doing all that stuff, and I never had any fatigue whatsoever in my hand. None. We have a nice little lanyard hole there. It's a very small knife. I did an introduction to this where I showed a comparison between like this and the Benchmade Bug Out and the Sebenza and all of that stuff, so if you want to check it out, you can. It's a very small knife. I think it's like 6.5 inches overall, or maybe 7. Like it's a small EDC outdoors knife. Just crazy comfortable. And the Sure Grip scales are, again, totally underrated. This G10 with the rubber infused into it is crazy comfortable. I had him blast this handle, so it's even more grippy. Like, it's not a smooth finish. It's very grippy because it's all blasted. So you can just really feel that rubber in there. It's not like the handle is squishy when you hyper focus on a specific area, but when you do this, it kind of, you really feel that rubber in there. So this is a knife where it's just crazy comfortable to use for long periods of time when you're doing a hammer grip and continuously kind of like working on a piece of wood like this or something, or doing some camp cooking and you're cutting all of the ingredients up for a meal. This is crazy comfortable. We did cross batoning with it. We took a twig, or not a twig, a limb, I would say, probably as thick as this. And we did put it on the telephone pole bench, and I went like this, batoned it through this way, 0 damage. It's got great edge stability, great toughness. I mean, it's just a complete home run, in my opinion, between the steel and the actual design. It was just a blast to use. It's one of those knives where the testing is over now, and I'm kind of bummed about it. Like, we've run it for a month, and I don't even want to put it down. So there's nothing I would change about it. I think if people really do want to use this for a dedicated outdoors knife, I would like to see some jimping. I would like to see some for your thumb. And because it's so small, I think we could actually utilize the index finger jimping up at the front as well. I think if he added some right here, some there, it would really be a great like knife to kind of lock into your hand for outdoor tasks. The convexed flat grind hybrid really provided full stability for this. Extremely tough. I really kind of tweaked this around in some wood and doing batoning and stuff, and just nothing happened to it at all. Great lateral strength, and these will be made in K390 moving forward, so that's just going to bring it up to a whole different level of performance. K390 is just one of the best steels I've ever used in my entire life. I can't find anything wrong about it from my testing. So the fact that we're going to have this beautiful, useful design in K390, that's going to be something to look forward to. You're going to have the patina factor. You're going to have just insane edge retention. Those are going to be wild. So that is my full review in depth after a month of consecutive use with the Duckhead Forge Slater in S60V. I can't wait for you guys to get your hands on the ones in K390. Check out Dusty's page, Duckhead Forge, on Instagram. He doesn't have a website, I don't think, so I will link his Instagram profile down below. He doesn't have like anywhere to order from, so you just have to direct message him on Instagram and put an order in. But if you're looking for a small little outdoors knife, we got them in K390 coming. These are just incredible. I can't think of anything that I would want to change about it. So that is the full review, guys. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something about S60V today. Nobody really talks about it. Like Larrin said, it's kind of the forgotten super steel of the knife world. So I was really excited to have a part in adding to that conversation through use. That's it, guys. I hope you go use your shit today, learn how to sharpen your knives. I will see you on the next video. I love you so much, fam. Take care.